I was rushed to the hospital with a massive heart attack, and the doctors frantically called my family, but they picked up the phone and said, "We cannot come right now, we are having a party." Even when the surgeon told them this could be his last chance to say goodbye, they did not show up. A week later, they finally came to the hospital looking for my checkbook, but my bed was empty and the sheets were cold. There was just a note on the pillow. When they read it, their faces went pale and their perfect little world began to crumble. My name is Harrison Prescott. I am 70 years old, and for 40 years I built skyscrapers and luxury condos across the state. I know the difference between a load-bearing wall and a facade. I know how to spot a crack in the foundation before the whole building comes down. But I never saw the cracks in my own family until the day my heart tried to stop beating. Before I tell you how I made them pay for every second of their betrayal, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever felt unappreciated by the people you sacrificed everything for. It was a Saturday afternoon in late October. The air in my garage smelled of old motor oil and sawdust, which to me is the smell of peace. I was under the hood of my 1967 Mustang Fastback. It was a project car I had bought 3 years ago, a rust bucket that I was restoring piece by piece with my own hands. My wife Beatrice hated it. She said a man of my wealth should drive a new Mercedes or have a chauffeur, but I liked the grease under my fingernails. It reminded me of who I was before the money. Before Prescott Developments became a multi-million-dollar empire. Before I became just a walking wallet to the people living in my house. I was tightening a bolt on the alternator when it happened. It was not a sharp pain like in the movies. It was a crushing weight. It felt like a bag of wet cement had been dropped directly onto my chest from a 10-story window. My wrench clattered to the concrete floor. The sound echoed loud and sharp in the quiet garage. I tried to take a breath, but my lungs refused to expand. It was as if the air in the room had turned into solid lead. My knees gave out. I collapsed against the cold fender of the Mustang and slid down to the oil-stained floor. My left arm went numb. A cold sweat broke out over my forehead, instantly soaking my gray hair. I knew exactly what this was. I had seen it happen to my foreman 10 years ago. It was a heart attack, and it was a big one. I gasped for air, like a fish thrown onto a dock. My vision started to tunnel, closing in at the edges with black static. Panic flared in my gut, but I forced it down. I am Harrison Prescott. I do not panic. I solve problems. I reached into the pocket of my grease-stained coveralls for my phone. My fingers felt like clumsy sausages. I could barely feel the screen. I managed to hit the emergency dial for 911. I wheezed my address to the dispatcher. My voice sounded wet and distant, like it was coming from someone else. "Stay on the line, sir," she said. "Help is coming." But I did not stay on the line. I hung up. I needed to hear a familiar voice. I needed to know that someone was coming for me, someone who loved me. I scrolled to my favorites. My wife Beatrice. No answer. It went straight to voicemail. I cursed under my breath. She was probably getting her hair done or criticizing the caterers. I called my daughter Natalie. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. The pain in my chest was getting worse. It felt like a vice tightening with every erratic beat of my heart. "Pick up," I whispered. "Please pick up." Finally, the call connected. But I did not hear my daughter's voice. I heard bass, thumping loud bass and the roar of a crowd. It sounded like a nightclub. "Hello!" she shouted over the noise. Her voice sounded annoyed, impatient. "Natalie," I wheezed. I tried to speak clearly, but my jaw was locking up. "Natalie, listen to me." "Dad," she cut me off. "You are calling at the worst possible time. We are just about to bring out the cake. Brad is making his speech." I closed my eyes, fighting the darkness that was creeping in. It was Brad's 40th birthday. Of course. How could I forget? I had written the check for it. $50,000 for a party at our estate. $50,000 for gourmet sliders and a DJ, and enough top-shelf liquor to drown a ship. I had signed that check just last Tuesday. Natalie, I said again, forcing the words out through the crushing pressure in my chest. I am in the garage. I think I am having a heart attack. There was a pause on the line. The music seemed to get louder. Then I heard her sigh. A long, exaggerated sigh of a teenager who has been asked to take out the trash, not a 38-year-old woman hearing her father is dying. "Oh my God, Dad, stop it," she snapped. "You are so dramatic. You probably just have indigestion from that chili you ate for lunch. I told you not to eat spicy food." "It is not indigestion," I gasped. "My arm is numb. I cannot breathe. Call 911. Come to the garage." "Dad, listen to me," she said, and her voice dropped to a harsh whisper. "Brad is about to blow out the candles. This is his big moment. He has been stressed about turning 40 for months. Do not ruin this for him. Do not make this about you. Just take an aspirin and go lie down. We will check on you in an hour or two when the guests start to leave." "But Natalie," I tried to say. "I have to go, Dad. The photographer is waving at me. Stop acting out for attention. It is embarrassing." Click. The line went dead. I stared at the phone in my trembling hand. The screen went black, reflecting my own face. Pale, sweating, dying. She hung up, my own daughter. The girl I had sat up with when she had the flu. The girl whose college tuition cost more than my first house. The girl I had walked down the aisle and handed over to that parasitic husband of hers. She hung up on me. I dropped the phone. It slid across the concrete floor just out of reach. I slumped sideways, my cheek pressing against the cold, hard ground. The smell of oil and rubber filled my nose. From where I lay, I could see the bottom shelf of my workbench. There was a small box sitting there wrapped in silver paper. It was a Rolex Daytona, a vintage model. I had spent 6 months tracking it down for Brad. I was going to walk up to the main house after I finished with the car. I was going to shake his hand and give him a $40,000 watch and tell him I was proud of him, even though I had to force the words out. I looked at that silver box and I felt something break inside me that had nothing to do with my heart. It was not a valve or an artery. It was the illusion I had maintained for decades. The illusion that my family loved me. They did not love me. They loved what I provided. They loved the checks. They loved the vacation homes. They loved the status of being a Prescott. But the man lying on the garage floor gasping for his last breath. He was an inconvenience. He was an interruption to the festivities. I tried to crawl toward the garage door, but my body refused to move. The pain was blinding now, a white hot fire in the center of my chest. I rolled onto my back and looked up at the ceiling. I could hear faint thumping from the main house, the bass from the DJ. They were dancing. They were drinking my champagne. They were celebrating the life of a man who had never worked a hard day in his life, while the man who paid for it all lay dying 50 yards away. I closed my eyes. I thought about Beatrice, my wife of 40 years. Was she dancing too? Was she holding a glass of wine, complaining to her friends that Harrison was sulking in the garage again? I heard a siren in the distance. It was getting closer. The wail rose and fell, piercing the Saturday afternoon air. The neighbors. Mrs. Gable next door must have seen the ambulance I called, or maybe she saw me collapse through the open garage door. The siren got louder, drowning out the party music. I heard tires screech on the driveway, car doors slamming, heavy boots running on concrete. In here, a voice shouted. Men in uniforms appeared above me. Paramedics. Their faces were focused and urgent. They did not know my net worth. They did not know my name. They just saw a man in trouble. "We got you, sir," one of them said, kneeling beside me. He had kind eyes. "Stay with us." They ripped open my coveralls. They attached sensors to my chest. The beeping of the monitor was fast and erratic. "BP is dropping," another voice yelled. "We need to move now." They lifted me onto a stretcher. The movement sent a fresh wave of agony through my body. As they wheeled me out of the garage, the bright sunlight hit my face. I turned my head to the side. Through the hedges, I could see the back patio of my house. It was crowded with people. Beautiful people in cocktail dresses and suits. I saw balloons. Gold and black balloons. I saw Brad standing on a chair raising a glass. He was laughing. His head was thrown back in pure joy. Natalie was next to him clapping. Beatrice was nowhere to be seen, probably inside coordinating the next course. They did not even turn around. The ambulance siren was blaring right in their driveway, and not a single one of them looked away from the cake. That was the last thing I saw before the darkness took me. My family celebrating my money while I was wheeled away to die. And in that moment of fading consciousness, I made a vow. If I survived this, if I woke up, there would be no more checks, no more parties, no more silence. They wanted to live without me. They wanted me to disappear so they could enjoy the party. Fine. I would give them exactly what they wanted. But the price of admission was going to be a lot higher than they ever imagined. The ambulance ride was a blur of noise and motion, a chaotic tunnel of sirens and flashing lights that seemed to stretch on forever. I felt every bump in the road as a fresh stab of agony in my chest. The paramedics were working over me, their voices tight, and professional shouting numbers and medical jargon that I could barely comprehend through the haze of pain. "BP is crashing. We are losing the rhythm. Push epi." When the doors finally burst open, we were at St. Jude's Hospital. The cool evening air rushed in for a split second before I was wheeled into the blinding white brightness of the emergency room bay. It was a sensory overload. The smell of antiseptic and rubbing alcohol assaulted my nose, sharp and stinging. The ceiling tiles whipped past in a dizzying blur. Faces loomed over me, masked and serious eyes wide with urgency. "We have a 70-year-old male, massive anterior myocardial infarction. Onset approximately 40 minutes ago. Vitals are unstable." I heard the words, but they felt like they were about someone else. Some poor old man who was dying alone. Then I realized with a jolt of terror that the old man was me. They maneuvered the stretcher into a trauma bay and transferred me onto a cold, hard hospital bed. Hands were everywhere. Someone was cutting my favorite grease-stained coveralls off my body with trauma shears. I wanted to tell them to be careful, that I had had those coveralls for 20 years, but my voice was trapped in my throat. Needles pierced my arms. Cold, sticky pads were slapped onto my bare chest. A man with graying hair and wire-rimmed glasses stepped into my line of sight. He looked calm, but his eyes held a grave intensity. This was the doctor. He leaned close to my face, shining a penlight into my eyes. "Mr. Prescott, can you hear me? I am Dr. Evans. You are having a very serious heart attack. Your left main artery is completely blocked. We call this the Widowmaker." The Widowmaker. The word hung in the air, heavy and final. I tried to nod, but my head felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. "We need to get you to surgery immediately to insert a stent and possibly perform a bypass." Dr. Evans continued. "However, your condition is extremely unstable. The surgery carries a very high risk. There is a significant chance of cardiac arrest on the table." He paused, looking around the room. "Is your family here, Mr. Prescott? We need a next of kin to sign the high-risk consent forms and be here for decision-making if complications arise. Given your state, we prefer a family member to authorize this." I tried to speak. I tried to tell him that my family was busy, that they were eating cake and drinking my wine, that they did not care if I lived or died. But all that came out was a wheezing rattle. Check his phone, the head nurse said. She was a stern woman with a compassionate face standing by the monitors. Her name tag read Margaret. She picked up my cell phone, which the paramedics had placed on the bedside table. I watched her scroll through my contacts. My vision was swimming, but I knew exactly who she would call. Beatrice, my wife. The woman who had sworn to love me in sickness and in health. The woman who was currently hosting the party of the year while I lay here half naked and dying. Margaret hit the dial button and put the phone on speaker so the doctor could hear. The ringing sound filled the small trauma bay. 1 ring, 2 rings, 3 rings. Please, I thought. Please, Beatrice. Just this once. Be the woman I married. Be the person who used to hold my hand when I had a fever. The call connected. Hello? Beatrice's voice boomed through the speaker. She sounded breathless and annoyed. I could hear the clinking of crystal glasses in the background and the murmur of 100 conversations. Someone was laughing a high, piercing shriek that sounded like a hyena. Mrs. Prescott, this is Margaret. The head nurse at St. Jude's emergency room, Margaret said, her voice clear and authoritative. We have your husband Harrison here. He has suffered a massive heart attack. There was a pause on the other end. I held my breath. My heart fluttered in my chest, a dying bird trying to escape a cage. Oh, really, Beatrice said, and her tone was not one of shock or fear. It was the tone she used when the dry cleaner lost a button on her blouse. Is it serious, or is he just having another one of his episodes? Harrison tends to exaggerate when he wants attention. Ma'am, this is not an exaggeration, Dr. Evans interjected, leaning toward the phone. His voice was sharp. Your husband is in critical condition. We need to operate immediately, but the risk is very high. We need you here to sign the consent forms and to be present. You need to come to the hospital right now. I watched the phone, waiting for her to scream, waiting for her to drop everything, waiting for the sound of car keys jingling. Instead, I heard a heavy sigh, the sound of ice cubes rattling in a glass. I cannot come right now, Beatrice said flatly. Her voice was loud enough for everyone in the room to hear. We are in the middle of the toasts. The mayor just arrived. I cannot just leave my guests. It would be incredibly rude. The room went dead silent. The beeping of my heart monitor seemed to get louder faster. The nurses stopped what they were doing. Dr. Evans looked at the phone as if it had turned into a snake. Mrs. Prescott. Margaret said, her voice trembling with suppressed rage. Did you hear the doctor? Your husband could die tonight. This is a life or death situation. Look, Beatrice snapped, her patience gone. Harrison is a tough old bird. He has survived worse. He is probably fine. I am not going to ruin my son-in-law's 40th birthday party because Harrison decided to have a health scare tonight of all nights. Do what you have to do, she continued dismissively. Do the surgery. Don't do the surgery. I don't care. Just handle it. And listen to me. Do not call me back tonight. I have guests to entertain, and I will not be disturbed again. If he dies, call me tomorrow morning, after 10 o'clock. I plan on sleeping in. The line clicked. Then the drone of the dial tone filled the room. The silence that followed was suffocating. It was heavier than the pain in my chest. It was a physical weight pressing down on me, crushing what little spirit I had left. I looked at Dr. Evans. He was staring at the phone, his mouth slightly open in disbelief. He looked up and met my eyes. For a moment, the professional mask slipped. I saw it. I saw the pity. He felt sorry for me, not because I was sick, not because I was in pain, but because I was a man whose life meant less to his wife than a birthday party toast. He looked at me like I was a discarded dog left by the side of the road. That look broke me. Hot tears welled up in my eyes and spilled over, running down my temples into my ears. I was not crying from the physical agony, although that was immense. I was crying from the shame, the burning, humiliating shame of it all. I had spent 40 years building an empire. I commanded respect on construction sites across the country. I signed checks that could buy small islands. And yet here I was, alone and unloved, valued less than a cocktail party. My family had not just abandoned me. They had discarded me. Beatrice's words echoed in my mind. "Call me tomorrow after 10. I plan on sleeping in." She was betting on my death. She was probably already calculating the insurance payout, figuring out how to spend it before my body was even cold. Harrison, Margaret said softly, She reached out and wiped the tears from my face with a tissue. Her touch was gentle, the first kindness I had felt all day. "We still need to do this surgery." I took a ragged breath. The pity in the doctor's eyes had ignited a spark of something deep inside me. It was not hope. It was anger. Cold, hard anger. I am not going to die like this, I thought. I am not going to die so she can sleep in. I am not going to die so Brad can enjoy his new watch. I tried to lift my arm. It felt like lead, but I forced it to move. I pointed a shaking finger at the clipboard in Dr. Evans's hand. "Give it to me," I rasped. My voice sounded like grinding stones. Dr. Evans hesitated. "Sir, we usually prefer family for this kind of risk." "I am my family," I wheezed. I realized in that moment it was the truest thing I had ever said. I was my only family. They had resigned from the position. "Give me the pen." Margaret placed the clipboard on my chest. She put the pen in my right hand. My fingers trembled uncontrollably. The pain in my chest spiked a fresh wave of fire that made my vision go white for a second. But I gritted my teeth. I focused on the line at the bottom of the page. I thought about the party. I thought about the laughter. I thought about the empty spot where my wife should be. With every ounce of strength I had left, I scrawled my signature. It was messy. It was shaky. But it was there. Harrison Prescott. I dropped the pen and looked straight at the doctor. I wanted him to see me. Not the victim. Not the discarded husband. But the man who built skyscrapers. "I take responsibility," I whispered, staring him down. "I take responsibility for my own life, since apparently no one else wants it." Dr. Evans nodded slowly, a new respect replacing the pity in his eyes. He took the clipboard. "All right, team," he shouted, his voice snapping back into command mode. "Let's move. Cath Lab 1. Now." As they unlocked the wheels of the bed and began to run down the hallway, I stared up at the passing lights. I was alone. I was terrified. But I was also alive. And as long as I was alive, there was a reckoning coming. Beatrice wanted to sleep in. Well, I was going to make sure she woke up to a nightmare. I woke up to the rhythmic electronic symphony of the intensive care unit. Beep, hiss, click, beep. It was the soundtrack of survival, but to my ears it sounded more like a countdown. The room was dim, lit only by the glowing green and red numbers on the monitors stacked around my bed like a fortress. My chest felt like it had been cracked open and wired back together, which I suppose was exactly what had happened. Every breath was a negotiation with pain. I turned my head to the left, moving slowly against the stiffness of my neck. There was a vinyl visitor chair in the corner. It was beige and looked uncomfortable. It was also completely empty. I stared at that empty chair for a long time. It was 3 a.m, the witching hour, the time when loved ones are supposed to be holding vigil. When Patrice was alive, and I had my gallbladder removed, she sat in a chair just like that for 2 straight nights, refusing to leave my side even to get coffee. She held my hand while I slept. But Patrice was gone, and the chair was empty. The silence in the room was heavier than the concrete slabs I used to pour for foundations. My personal effects were in a clear plastic bag on the bedside table. I saw the corner of my iPad sticking out. My hand trembled as I reached for it. The IV lines tugged at my skin, a sharp reminder of my frailty, but I ignored them. I needed to see. I needed to know. It was a masochistic urge, like pressing on a bruise to see if it still hurts. I pulled the tablet onto the bed and tapped the screen. The harsh artificial light stung my tired eyes. I unlocked it and saw a notification banner sitting right at the top. Instagram. Brad is live now. He had been live for hours. The red badge pulsed on the screen like a warning light. I hesitated, my finger hovering over the glass. Part of me, the part that was still a father and a husband, wanted to put it away. Wanted to close my eyes and pretend that they were just stuck in traffic or sleeping off the stress of worrying about me. But the man who built an empire on hard truths took over. I tapped the notification. The silence of the ICU was instantly shattered by the tinny roar of a party coming through the iPad speakers. I scrambled to turn the volume down, glancing at the nurse's station through the glass wall, but no one came. On the screen was chaos. My backyard, my sanctuary, was unrecognizable. The pool lights were flashing in sync with thumping bass music. People I did not know were dancing on my manicured lawn, trampling the hydrangeas I had planted with my own hands. The camera shook and then swiveled around to reveal Brad's face. He was flushed, sweating, and clearly drunk. His tie was tied around his head like a bandana, and his eyes were glazed over with the manic energy of a man who thinks he has won the lottery. He was holding a bottle of wine. I squinted at the screen, and my breath hitched in my throat, causing the heart monitor to speed up its beeping. I knew that bottle. Dark glass, gold lettering, the distinct slope of the shoulders. It was my Chateau Margaux 1990. I had bought that bottle at an auction in Paris 20 years ago. It was not just wine. It was a memory. It was an investment. I had told Beatrice 1,000 times that we would open it on our 50th wedding anniversary. It was stored in the back of the cellar in a temperature-controlled case. It was sacred, and there was Brad holding it by the neck like it was a $3 bottle of beer. "Hey everyone," Brad shouted into the camera, slurring his words. "Look what I found in the secret stash. The old man has been hiding the good stuff." He laughed, a wet, ugly sound. He fumbled with the corkscrew, tearing the foil wrapper that had been pristine for decades. I watched in horror as he jammed the corkscrew in and yanked. The cork broke. He cursed, laughed again, and just pushed the rest of the cork down into the bottle. He took a swig straight from the bottle. Wine spilled down his chin onto his expensive dress shirt. My shirt, actually. He had borrowed it from my closet last week and never returned it. He wiped his mouth with the back of his hand and looked directly into the camera lens. It felt like he was looking right at me, lying broken in my hospital bed. "I want to make a special toast," he bellowed, raising the bottle high, "to my father-in-law Harrison, the ultimate party sponsor." The crowd behind him cheered. I scanned the faces in the background, desperate to see someone looking sad, someone looking worried. Anyone. "Thank you, Harrison, for the open bar." Brad continued, his voice dripping with mock gratitude. The old miser finally coughed up some cash. He is currently rotting in a hospital bed somewhere, probably faking it to get out of paying the bill. He took another drink and then leaned in close to the camera, whispering loudly as if sharing a secret with his 500 followers. "Between us guys, hopefully he kicks the bucket tonight. Seriously. If he goes, we are set for life. No more begging for allowance. No more listening to his lectures about hard work. Just pure cash, baby. So here is to the Widowmaker. Do your job, buddy." I felt a physical blow to my chest that was harder than the heart attack itself. He was wishing for my death. He was broadcasting it to the world. And nobody was stopping him. "Hey, honey," Brad shouted, turning the camera away from his face. "Come say hi to the fans." The camera swung around and focused on a group of women sitting on the expensive outdoor sofas I had imported from Italy. In the center, holding court with a glass of champagne in each hand, were Beatrice and Natalie. My wife, my daughter. They were laughing. Not a polite, nervous laugh. A deep belly laugh. Beatrice threw her head back, her pearl necklace catching the strobe lights. She looked radiant. She looked happy. She looked relieved. Brad just said he hopes Dad kicks the bucket. Natalie giggled, taking a sip of her drink. You are terrible, Brad. He is practical, Beatrice chimed in, her voice shrill. Oh God, imagine the freedom. No more nagging about the electric bill. No more greasing up the garage. We could finally sell that old junk heap Mustang and get a proper car. Freedom forever, Natalie shouted, raising her glass. Freedom forever, Beatrice echoed, clinking her glass against her daughter's. To freedom. They drank. They laughed. They went back to their party. I stared at the frozen image on the screen. My wife and daughter toasting to my death, calling it freedom. The video buffered for a second, then cut out as the battery on the iPad died. The screen went black, reflecting my face once again. But the face staring back at me was different this time. The fear was gone. The sadness was gone. The man who had cried because the doctor looked at him with pity was dead. He had died the moment Beatrice raised that glass. In his place was something cold, something hard, something unbreakable. My heart, which had been fluttering like a wounded bird, suddenly steadied. The rhythm on the monitor slowed down, becoming consistent and strong. Beep, beep, beep. It was the sound of a war drum. They wanted freedom. They wanted my money without the inconvenience of my presence. They wanted to erase Harrison Prescott, the man, and keep Harrison Prescott, the bank account. I carefully placed the iPad back on the table. My movements were precise and deliberate. I ignored the pain in my chest. Pain was just information now, and the information was that I was alive. I reached for my phone. It was 3:15 in the morning. Most people would be asleep. But Sullivan was not most people. Sullivan was the only shark in this town who was deadlier than me. I dialed his personal number. It rang twice. Harrison Sullivan's voice was gravelly with sleep, but instantly alert. The hospital called me. They said you made it. I was going to come in the morning. Do not wait for morning, I said. My voice surprised me. It was not weak. It was not raspy. It was steel. It was the voice I used when I fired a subcontractor for cutting corners. Harrison, what is wrong? Sullivan asked. Are you okay? I am better than okay, Sullivan, I said, staring at the blank wall of the ICU. I have never been clearer in my life. I need you to come to the hospital right now. Bring the briefcase. Sullivan paused. The briefcase. You mean the Omega file? The contingency plan? Yes, I said. The scorched earth protocol. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I could hear Sullivan sitting up in bed, the rustle of sheets. He knew what was in that file. We had drafted it 5 years ago as a dark joke, a what-if scenario for a day I never thought would come. It was the nuclear option. It was the button you push when you want to burn the village to save the kingdom. Harrison Sullivan said slowly, his voice dropping an octave. If we execute those documents, there is no going back. You will leave them with nothing. You will strip them to the bone. Are you sure? I closed my eyes and saw the image of Beatrice raising her glass. Freedom forever. I opened my eyes. They are already celebrating my death, Sullivan, I said coldly. I do not want to disappoint them. If they want me gone, I will be gone. But I am taking the checkbook with me. Bring the papers. Bring a notary. And bring my suit. The blue one. Harrison, you are in the ICU. You cannot leave. Watch me, I said. I hung up the phone. I lay back against the pillows and watched the monitor. My heart was beating steady and strong. It was pumping blood. It was pumping life. And for the first time in years, it was pumping purpose. Let them have their party. Let them drink the Margot. Let them dance on my lawn. Because when the sun comes up, the music is going to stop. And when the hangover sets in, they are going to realize that the ATM has been unplugged permanently. I waited for Sullivan, listening to the beeps plotting my exit. The widowmaker hadn't killed me, and my family sure as hell wasn't going to finish the job. I was Harrison Prescott, and I was just getting started. Sullivan arrived 45 minutes later. He did not look like a man who had been dragged out of bed in the middle of the night. He was wearing a charcoal suit, a crisp white shirt, and a silk tie. His silver hair was perfectly combed. That was Sullivan. He treated a crisis like a board meeting. He carried a battered leather briefcase that looked like it had survived a war zone, which in a legal sense it probably had. He walked into the ICU room and set the briefcase on the rolling table over my bed. He didn't ask how I was feeling. He didn't offer empty platitudes. He just looked at the monitors, looked at me, and nodded. "You look like hell, Harrison," he said, his voice low and steady. "I feel like hell," I replied. "But my mind is clear, Sullivan. Clearer than it has been in 40 years. He clicked the latches on the briefcase. The sound was loud in the quiet room. Snap! Snap! He opened the lid and pulled out a thick manila envelope sealed with red wax. On the front, in my own handwriting, were the words Omega Protocol. "We drafted this 5 years ago," Sullivan said, holding the envelope. "After that Christmas when Natalie forgot to buy you a gift, but asked for a new Range Rover. We laughed about it then. We said it was the nuclear option, a doomsday scenario." "It is doomsday, Sullivan," I said. "Open it." He broke the seal. He laid the documents out on the table. They were already prepared. All they needed were dates and signatures. Power of attorney. Asset transfer authorizations. The creation of the Phoenix Trust. A revocable living trust that would strip my name from every deed and title I owned. "I want it all done tonight," I said. "I want the house, the Aspen Lodge, the lake house, the condo in Miami. Transfer everything into the trust. I want my name off the titles by the time the courthouse opens." Sullivan pulled out a gold fountain pen. He began filling in dates. "And the liquid assets?" I asked. Sullivan tapped his iPad. "I can initiate the wire transfers now. We move the funds from the joint accounts at Chase and Wells Fargo into the trust's holding account at a private bank in Switzerland. It will trigger some flags, but since you are the primary account holder and I have your power of attorney, we can push it through." "Do it," I said. "Leave the joint accounts with exactly $1 each. I do not want them to think it was a bank error. I want them to know it was me." Sullivan's fingers flew across the screen. I watched him. With every tap, he was erasing my family's future. He was deleting the inheritance they thought was their birthright. "Beatrice has a supplementary card on your Amex Centurion," Sullivan said, not looking up. "And Natalie has the platinum. Brad has a gold card attached to the business account." "Cancel them," I said. "All of them. Report them as compromised. Flag them for immediate decline." Sullivan paused. His finger hovered over the screen. He looked up at me over his reading glasses. His eyes were dark and serious. "Harrison," he said softly, "if I press this button, if we execute these transfers, they will wake up to nothing. No access to cash, no credit, no legal claim to the roof over their heads. You are cutting off their oxygen." I thought about the live stream. I thought about the laughter. I thought about the empty chair in the corner of the room. "They cut off my oxygen first, Sullivan," I said. "They left me on a garage floor to die. They told the doctors not to call back because they wanted to sleep in." "But they are your family," Sullivan pressed. He was playing devil's advocate, testing my resolve. He needed to know I wouldn't regret this in the morning. "Are you absolutely sure you want to do this? They will be destitute. They have never worked for anything. They do not know how to survive without you. I looked at my hands. They were calloused, scarred. These hands had laid bricks. They had framed walls. They had signed contracts that built neighborhoods. They don't need me, Sullivan, I said, my voice raspy but firm. They made that very clear tonight. They need Harrison the checkbook. They need Harrison the safety net. But Harrison, the man, he is already gone to them. I looked him dead in the eye. They already consider me dead, Sullivan. And dead men cannot pay bills. Sullivan held my gaze for a long moment. Then he nodded. A small, grim smile touched his lips. Understood, he said. He tapped the screen. Done. The cards are dead. The transfers are initiated. By 9 a.m., the joint accounts will be empty. The real estate transfers will take 24 hours to record, but the legal mechanism is in motion. As of this moment, you are essentially a pauper on paper, Harrison. The Phoenix Trust owns everything, and you are the sole beneficiary. Good, I said. Now the next part. I need you to get me out of here. Sullivan frowned. You just had heart surgery. You cannot leave. I am not staying here to be gawked at, I said. I am not staying here so Beatrice can come in tomorrow with her fake tears and ask where the insurance papers are. I need to disappear. I have a plane standing by at the private airfield, Sullivan said. It can take you to the clinic in Montana, the one we invested in last year. It is discreet, top-tier medical staff. No one will find you there. Perfect, I said. Make the arrangements. I want to be gone before the sun comes up. Sullivan packed up the papers. He closed the briefcase with a solid final click. He stood there for a moment looking at me. You know they will hate you for this, he said. When they realize what you have done. When the shock wears off. They will hate you with everything they have. Let them hate me, I said, closing my eyes. Hate is better than indifference. At least hate is an emotion. It is more than I have gotten from them in 20 years. Sullivan turned to leave but stopped at the door. Harrison, he said. Yeah. That watch. The one you bought for Brad. The Daytona. I swallowed hard. It was still in the garage, probably covered in dust by now. What about it? Did you give it to him? No, I whispered. I never got the chance. Good, Sullivan said. Keep it. He doesn't know what time it is anyway. He walked out. I was alone again, but the silence felt different now. It wasn't the silence of abandonment. It was the silence of a calm before the storm. I lay there listening to the hum of the machines, and I imagined the scene at my house. The music fading. The guests leaving. Beatrice and Natalie going to sleep in their silk sheets, drunk on champagne and the promise of my fortune. Sleep tight, I thought. Enjoy your dreams. Because when the sun comes up, the nightmare begins. I watched the clock on the wall. 4:15. 4:30. 5 o'clock. The sky outside the window began to turn a bruised purple. Dawn was coming. The nurses would be doing their rounds soon. I had to move. I sat up. The pain in my chest roared a protest, but I ignored it. I swung my legs over the edge of the bed. My hospital gown was thin and flimsy. I felt naked, vulnerable. But underneath the cotton, I was made of iron. I stood up. My knees wobbled but held. I walked to the window and looked out at the city. Somewhere out there, my accounts were draining. Digital millions were flying through the ether, moving from the reach of my greedy family into the fortress of the Phoenix Trust. I was burning the bridge. I was salting the earth. And for the first time since the heart attack, I took a deep breath without pain. It was the breath of freedom. I turned back to the room. I needed to write the note. I needed to leave them one last message, not a suicide note. No, that would be too kind. This was an eviction notice. I found a notepad on the bedside table. I picked up the pen I had used to sign my own surgery consent form. My hand was steady now. I wrote 3 sentences. I folded the paper and placed it on the pillow. Then I heard the soft squeak of rubber soles in the hallway. Sullivan was back. He had a wheelchair and a trench coat. "Your chariot awaits," he said. I put on the coat covering the hospital gown. I sat in the chair. Sullivan pushed me toward the door. We moved through the quiet corridors of the hospital like ghosts, past the sleeping nurses' station, past the waiting room where families huddled together for comfort, past the exit signs. We rolled out into the cool morning air. A black SUV was waiting at the curb, engine idling. The driver opened the door. I climbed in. Sullivan sat beside me. As the car pulled away, I looked back at the hospital one last time. Goodbye, Harrison Prescott, the father. Thought. Goodbye, Harrison Prescott, the husband. The SUV accelerated, merging onto the highway headed for the airfield. The sun broke over the horizon, blinding and bright. A new day, a new life. And back at the mansion, the first credit card transaction of the day was about to be declined. I smiled. It was going to be a very interesting morning. 5 days. That is how long it took for the adrenaline of revenge to stitch my broken heart back together. The doctors at the private clinic in Montana called it a miraculous recovery. They said my vitals were stabilizing faster than men half my age. They talked about resilience and genetics. But they were wrong. It was not biology. It was pure, unadulterated spite. I sat on the terrace of the lodge, wrapped in a thick wool blanket, watching the sun rise over the Bitterroot Mountains. The air here was thin and cold, sharp enough to cut glass. It filled my lungs without the heaviness of the city, without the suffocating weight of my family's expectations. Inside, Sullivan had set up a command center. 3 monitors displayed the real-time dismantling of my former life. I watched as the wire transfers cleared. I watched as the deeds were recorded in the county clerk's database under the anonymity of the Phoenix Trust. I watched my net worth on paper drop to 0, while the trust swelled with 8 figures of liquid assets. I was a ghost. A wealthy ghost, but a ghost nonetheless. Back in the city, my absence had gone largely unnoticed for the first few days. I had turned off my phone. Sullivan handled the few inquiries from the hospital regarding my discharge, telling them only that I had been transferred to a specialist facility. He did not tell them where. He did not tell them why. Beatrice and Natalie had not called the hospital. Not once. I checked the logs. They were too busy recovering from the birthday weekend, too busy nursing hangovers and sorting through the mountain of gifts Brad had received. They assumed I was rotting in the ICU, sedated and secure, waiting for them to come by whenever they found a spare moment in their busy social calendar. But that morning the grace period ended. The caterer for the party had been calling Beatrice. The check I had written weeks ago, the deposit was fine, but the final balance was due. And since I had drained the main checking account on the night of my attack, that check was going to bounce higher than a rubber ball. Beatrice did not know that yet. She just knew she needed a signature. She needed Harrison, the problem solver. I imagined the scene perfectly. It played out in my mind like a movie I had directed myself. It was 10 in the morning. Beatrice would be dressed in her white linen pantsuit, the one she wore when she wanted to project authority. She would be driving her Range Rover, complaining about the traffic on the way to St. Jude's. Natalie would be in the passenger seat, scrolling through her phone, deleting negative comments on her social media, probably ignoring the fact that her father had almost died less than a week ago. They arrived at the hospital annoyed. I know this because Sullivan had a man watching, a private investigator sitting in the waiting room reading a newspaper. They marched up to the nurses' station. Beatrice tapped her manicured nails on the counter. "Excuse me," she said, her voice carrying that tone of imperious entitlement she had perfected over 40 years. "I am here to see my husband, Harrison Prescott. We need to speak with him immediately. It is a financial matter." "Financial matter, not—" "We are worried. Not is he okay. Just money. Always money." The nurse behind the counter was Margaret, the same woman who had made the call that night, the same woman who had wiped the tears from my face when my family refused to show up. Margaret looked up. She did not smile. She did not offer the polite deference Beatrice was used to. She looked at them with a cold, hard stare. "Mrs. Prescott," Margaret said flatly, "you finally decided to visit. It has been 5 days." Beatrice bristled. "We have been incredibly busy. My son-in-law had a milestone birthday. It was a very complex event to manage. Besides, we knew Harrison was in good hands. Is he awake? We need him to sign some checks." Natalie chimed in, popping her gum. "Yeah, and Brad needs his car keys. Dad has the spare set for the Mustang, and Brad wants to move it out of the garage so he can park his new Porsche." Margaret stood up slowly. She picked up a thick white envelope from the desk. It was sealed. My name was written on the front, but Margaret had crossed it out and written Beatrice. "Mr. Prescott is not here," Margaret said. Beatrice frowned. "What do you mean he is not here? Is he in surgery? Did they move him to a different floor?" "He was discharged 3 days ago," Margaret said, delivering the words like a judge passing a sentence. "Discharged." Beatrice laughed, a nervous, incredulous sound. "That is impossible. He had a massive heart attack. He cannot just walk out. Where did he go? Did he go home? We did not see him at the house." "He did not go home," Margaret said. "He left. He checked himself out, against medical advice initially, but his private physician cleared him for transport. He is gone, Mrs. Prescott." "Gone," Natalie repeated, stepping forward. "Gone where?" "He did not say," Margaret replied. "But he left this for you." She held out the envelope. Beatrice took it. Her hands were shaking slightly. Not from fear, I suspect, but from irritation. She probably thought it was a letter of complaint or a list of instructions on how to manage the pool chemicals while I was away. She ripped open the envelope. Inside, there was no check. There was no power of attorney. There was no letter of apology for ruining their party. There were 2 things. The first was a bill. A detailed itemized invoice from St. Jude's Hospital for the emergency surgery, the ICU stay, and the cardiac stent. The total was $142,000. At the bottom, where the insurance information should have been, it was blank. But in the line for guarantor responsible party, I had instructed the hospital billing department to list Beatrice Prescott. I did not have my wallet that night, I had told the billing clerk before I left. "My wife handles the finances. Send the bill to her." Beatrice stared at the bill. Her eyes bulged. $140,000, she shrieked. "Why am I seeing this? Insurance covers this. Harrison has the platinum plan. Why is my name on this?" "Keep reading," Margaret said coldly. Beatrice pulled out the second piece of paper. It was a single sheet of hospital stationery. My handwriting was shaky but legible. I had written it minutes before Sullivan wheeled me out. Beatrice read it aloud, her voice trembling with rising panic. "I heard your wishes that night. You toasted to freedom. You toasted to the Widowmaker. You said you wanted to sleep in." She stopped. She looked at Natalie. Natalie's face had gone pale. The gum fell out of her mouth. "Keep going," Margaret urged. Beatrice looked back at the note. "You said you hoped I would go so you would be set for life. Well, congratulations. Wishes come true. I am gone. Do not look for me. Do not call me. And do not worry about the noise in the garage anymore. The Mustang is gone too. Beatrice lowered the paper. The silence in the hospital hallway was absolute. This is a joke, she whispered. This is one of his sick, passive-aggressive jokes. He is trying to punish us for not coming to the hospital. He is hiding at a hotel. She pulled out her phone. She dialed my number. I was sitting on the terrace in Montana when my phone buzzed. I looked at the screen. Beatrice. I did not answer. I picked up the glass of water on the table next to me and dropped the SIM card into it. At the hospital, Beatrice heard the call go straight to a disconnected message. Not voicemail. Disconnected. The number you are trying to reach is no longer in service. She tried again. And again. Her face turned from red to white. He cut the line, she said, looking at Natalie with wide, terrified eyes. He actually cut the line. Natalie grabbed her own phone. She opened her banking app. I had canceled her access to the joint accounts, but she still had her own personal savings account, which I used to replenish every month. She stared at the screen. Mom, she said, her voice high and thin. Mom, the transfer. The monthly transfer. It did not come through this morning. It is usually here by 9 a.m. Beatrice scrambled to check her own accounts. She logged into the joint checking account, the one we used for household expenses, the one that usually held $50,000 for operating costs. She gasped. A loud, strangled sound that echoed in the lobby. It is empty, she screamed. It is zero. There is $1, one single dollar. She tapped the screen furiously, refreshing the page over and over again, hoping it was a glitch, hoping it was a mistake. But the number remained. $1. He took it, she whispered. He took it all. No, Natalie said, shaking her head. He cannot do that. It is family money. It is our money. It was his money, Margaret said from behind the counter. She had watched the entire scene with a look of grim satisfaction. And now it seems he has decided to keep it. Beatrice looked up at the nurse. Her face was a mask of pure horror. The realization was finally hitting her. This was not a tantrum. This was not a sulk. This was an eviction. Where is he? Beatrice demanded, lunging toward the counter. You have to tell me where he went. He is a sick man. He needs medication. He needs care. He seemed fine to me, Margaret said calmly, picking up a file and turning away. He walked out of here on his own 2 feet. Which is more than I can say for you. You did not even walk in here when he was dying. You cannot leave us like this, Beatrice screamed, grabbing the counter. We have bills. We have the party to pay for. We have the mortgage. Margaret pressed a button on her desk. Security to the nursing station, please. We have a disturbance. Beatrice and Natalie stood there in the middle of the hospital lobby, holding a bill they could not pay and a note that signaled the end of their world. The reality of their situation began to settle in like a cold fog. The ATM was broken. The safety net was gone. Back in Montana, I watched the sun climb higher into the sky. I took a deep breath of the pine-scented air. I could imagine the panic ensuing in Chicago. I could imagine Brad waking up at noon hungover, expecting breakfast in bed, only to find his wife and mother-in-law hysterical about a $1 bank balance. I felt a twinge of phantom pain in my chest, but it passed quickly. My heart was healing. It was beating stronger than it had in years. Sullivan walked out onto the terrace holding a tablet. The investigator says they just left the hospital, Sullivan said. Beatrice was screaming at a security guard. Natalie was crying in the parking lot. They are heading to the bank. Let them go, I said, sipping my coffee. Let them talk to the branch manager. Let them hear the words insufficient funds and account closed by primary holder. What is the next step? Sullivan asked. The next step, I said, standing up and walking to the railing looking out over the vast, empty wilderness, is the house. They are going to go home thinking they are safe, thinking they still have a roof over their heads. They think the house belongs to them. I turned to Sullivan. How long until the foreclosure notice is served? The team is already en route, Sullivan said, checking his watch. The repo trucks are staging 2 blocks away. They have the court order. The Phoenix Trust officially took possession of the property at 9 a.m. this morning. Good, I said. They wanted a party, Sullivan. They wanted a spectacle. Well, the party is over. Now it is time for the cleanup crew. I looked back at the mountains. Brad thinks he is the man of the house, I said quietly. Let us see how much of a man he is when the locks are changed and his Porsche is on a tow truck. The dominoes were falling, one by one. Click, click, click. And I was just sitting here watching them tumble. Back in the pristine wilderness of Montana, I sat in front of a bank of monitors that Sullivan had set up. I was not watching the news or the stock market. I was watching a specific feed from the transaction alerts on my secure banking app. It was a digital window into the unraveling of my family. They were still operating under the delusion that this was a temporary glitch. They thought I was having a tantrum. They thought I was an old man sitting in a hotel room somewhere pouting until they apologized enough to turn the money tap back on. They had no idea that the tap had not just been turned off. It had been ripped out of the wall and melted down. The first notification popped up at 11:15 in the morning. It was from a Shell station in the upscale district just a few miles from our estate. I knew immediately who it was. Brad. My son-in-law loved to take my vintage Porsche 911 out for a spin on Saturday mornings to show off to the neighbors. He never asked permission. He just took the keys from the hook in the mudroom like he owned the place. I could picture the scene perfectly. Brad pulling up to the pump wearing his aviator sunglasses and that smug grin he wore like a second skin. He would step out of the car, making sure everyone saw his Italian loafers. He would probably leave the engine idling just to let the exhaust note rumble. I watched the alert on my screen. Attempted charge. $85. Premium fuel. Status declined. Reason card reported lost or stolen. I leaned back in my leather chair and took a sip of black coffee. The show was beginning. At the gas station, Brad likely stared at the pump screen in confusion. He probably wiped the chip on his pants, thinking it was just a smudge. He tried again. Declined. I imagined his irritation turning into anger. He would march into the convenience store acting like he owned the franchise. He would throw a bag of beef jerky and an energy drink on the counter and toss the heavy black Centurion card at the clerk. That card was a symbol of my hard work. It had a limit that could buy a small house. Brad treated it like a magic wand. "Run it again, Chief," he would say, his voice dripping with condescension. "Your machine outside is broken." The clerk, a tired teenager earning minimum wage, would swipe the card. The register would beep a harsh rejecting sound. "I am sorry, sir," the clerk would say. "The system says this card has been reported stolen. I have to confiscate it." Stolen. Brad would shout, his face turning that ugly shade of blotchy red. "It is not stolen, you idiot. It is my father-in-law's card. I have authorization. Give it back." "I cannot do that, sir," the clerk would reply, following the strict instructions from American Express. "Please do not make a scene or I will have to call the police." Brad would fumble for his wallet. He would pull out the gold card. The business card I gave him for emergencies only. He tried to use it. Alert. Attempted charge. $112. Status declined. Account closed. Brad was standing there with a tank full of gas he could not pay for and a line of angry customers forming behind him. He had no cash. He never carried cash because he thought it was for poor people. He would have to leave his driver's license as collateral. He would have to call Natalie to come save him. He would have to sit on the curb next to my Porsche, looking like a fool, while the world realized he was nothing but a fraud in borrowed clothes. I smiled. One domino down. But the real show, the main event, was happening across town. Beatrice had an appointment at the sanctuary. It was the most exclusive spa in the city. Marble floors, harp music playing softly in the background, scents of eucalyptus and lavender pumped through the air vents. It was a place where rich women went to forget that they were aging. Beatrice went there every Saturday without fail. She called it her essential maintenance. I called it burning money. She was there with her entourage, Linda and Susan, two women who were just as vapid and grasping as she was. They competed over everything. Who had the biggest diamond? Who had the youngest surgeon? Whose husband was the most generous? Beatrice had just finished a $400 facial and a $200 massage. They were sitting in the lounge wrapped in plush white robes, drinking cucumber water and probably gossiping about my heart attack. Beatrice would be spinning it. She would be playing the long, suffering wife of a difficult invalid. "Oh, Harrison is just so stubborn," she would be saying. "He refuses to listen to reason. I have to manage everything myself. It is exhausting being the strong one." The bill arrived on a small silver tray, $2,400. She had treated her friends to champagne and treatments. Of course she had. It is easy to be generous with someone else's money. Beatrice would not even look at the total. She would just wave her hand dismissively and place her platinum card on the tray. "Add 20% for yourself, dear," she would say to the receptionist, giving her a benevolent smile like a queen tossing coins to a peasant. The receptionist, a girl named Chloe, walked back to the counter. I knew Chloe. I had tipped her extra at Christmas because I knew Beatrice was rude to her. I watched the monitor. Alert. Attempted charge. $2,400. Merchant the sanctuary. Status declined. Refer to issuer. Chloe returned to the lounge. She looked uncomfortable. She held the card with 2 fingers as if it were contaminated. "Mrs. Prescott." "I am so sorry," Chloe said softly, trying not to embarrass Beatrice in front of her friends. The card was declined. "Do you have another form of payment?" Beatrice laughed. A sharp, incredulous bark. "Declined. Don't be ridiculous. That is an unlimited card. Your machine must be offline. Try it again. And make sure you are doing it right this time." She pushed the card back toward Chloe. "I tried it 3 times, Mrs. Prescott," Chloe whispered. "It says refer to issuer. That usually means the account has been frozen or the primary cardholder has locked it." Linda and Susan exchanged a look. The sharks smelled blood in the water. "This is absurd," Beatrice snapped, her voice rising. "Harrison must have messed something up with the bill payment. He has been in the hospital and his mind is not right. Give me my phone." She snatched her phone from her purse. She did not call me. She knew I wasn't answering. She called the private banking line at Chase. She had the number on speed dial. She put it on speaker because Beatrice did not know how to be discreet, and she wanted her friends to hear her fixing the problem. She wanted to prove she was still in charge. The automated system asked for her access code. She entered it. "Access denied," the robotic voice said. Beatrice frowned. She punched 0 furiously, demanding to speak to a representative. After a minute, a human voice came on the line. It was a senior account manager. Sullivan had briefed the bank personally. "Mrs. Prescott," the manager said, his voice cool and professional. "How can I help you?" "My card is not working," Beatrice hissed. "And I am at the spa. Fix it immediately. This is embarrassing. I am afraid I cannot do that." "Mrs. Prescott," the manager replied. "Mr. Prescott came into the branch this morning via secure video conference. He has removed you from all accounts. He has revoked your authorization on all credit lines. You are no longer a signatory on any Prescott holdings." The lounge went silent. The harp music seemed to stop. Every woman in the room turned to look at Beatrice. "What are you talking about?" Beatrice screamed, losing all pretense of composure. I am his wife. It is our money. He cannot just cut me off. He is having a mental breakdown. I demand you reinstate the cards. Mr. Prescott was quite lucid, ma'am, the manager said. He provided a notarized letter from his attorney and a mental competency evaluation from his doctors. The accounts are closed to you. There is nothing I can do. Have a good day. The line went dead. Beatrice stood there in her white robe holding a dead phone. Her face was a mask of shock and fury. Linda and Susan were staring at her not with sympathy, but with a delicious sort of horror. This was the best gossip they had heard in years. Beatrice Prescott, the queen bee, had been dethroned. You have to pay the bill, Mrs. Prescott, Chloe said gently. Beatrice looked at her friends. Linda suddenly found something very interesting on her fingernails. Susan checked her watch. I left my wallet in the car, Linda mumbled. Beatrice stammered. I do not have any other cards. Harrison handles everything. She was trapped. For the first time in 40 years, Beatrice had to face a bill she could not pay. She had to undergo the humiliation of calling Natalie, who was already dealing with Brad's crisis, at the gas station. She had to wait in the lobby while the other patrons whispered and pointed. She had to feel the weight of every judgmental stare. I watched the screen in Montana. The alerts had stopped. The silence from the bank feed was beautiful. They thought I was just sulking. They thought I was hiding. Now they knew. This wasn't a game of hide and seek. This was a siege. I closed the laptop. My coffee was cold, but it tasted like nectar. I walked to the window and looked out at the mountains. The air was crisp and clean. They were panicking now. They were scared, but they were still arrogant. They still thought this was a mistake they could fix with a lawyer or a lawsuit. They didn't realize that I hadn't just locked the doors. I had sold the building. The next phase was about to begin. The repo trucks were already rolling, and when they got home, they were going to find out that the only thing they legally owned was the clothes on their backs. I picked up the phone and dialed Sullivan. Did the spa transaction go through? I asked. Declined, Sullivan replied. And the gas station, too. Brad had to leave his driver's license. He is walking home. Good, I said. Make sure the team is ready at the house. I want them waiting in the driveway when they get back. They will be there, Harrison. I hung up. I imagined Brad walking 3 miles in his Italian loafers, developing blisters on his soft feet. I imagined Beatrice sitting in the spa lobby, her makeup running, realizing she was no longer the queen of anything. Welcome to the real world, I whispered. I hope you brought comfortable shoes. I watched the feed from the security cameras mounted on the stone pillars of my estate. The afternoon sun was beating down on the driveway, casting long, sharp shadows across the pavement. It was the kind of heat that made the asphalt shimmer, but inside the lodge in Montana, the air conditioner was humming a cool, steady rhythm. Brad had finally made it back. He looked like a man who had walked through a war zone. His expensive Italian loafers were covered in road dust and scuffed beyond repair. His silk shirt was stuck to his back with sweat, and his face was a mask of sunburn and rage. He was limping slightly, favoring his right foot where a blister had likely formed miles ago. Natalie pulled up a moment later in her white Range Rover. She had evidently rescued him from the side of the road after dealing with her own panic attack. She slammed the car door shut and marched toward him. I could not hear what she was saying through the camera microphone at this distance, but her body language screamed accusation. She was waving her hands, pointing at his phone, pointing at the house. They turned together toward the main gate, expecting it to glide open as it always did. They expected the sensors to read their tags and welcome them home to the air-conditioned sanctuary of the mansion. Instead, they found a heavy industrial chain wrapped around the iron bars. A padlock the size of a fist secured it. And standing directly in front of the gate, blocking their passage, were 3 men. They were not the usual neighborhood security patrol. These men wore tactical black uniforms with no insignias. They wore polarized sunglasses and stood with their hands clasped in front of them, feet shoulder-width apart. They looked like a wall of granite. Brad marched up to the tallest one. I zoomed in on the camera. I wanted to see every twitch of his face. "What is the meaning of this?" Brad shouted. He tried to sound authoritative, but his voice cracked. "Open this gate immediately. I live here." The guard did not move. He did not even blink. "This is private property," the guard said. His voice was flat, devoid of emotion. "Access is restricted to authorized personnel only." "I am authorized," Brad screamed. "I am Brad Miller. My father-in-law owns this house. I have lived here for 3 years. Open the gate or I will call the police." "Please do," the guard replied. "We have the trespassing warrants ready." Natalie pushed past Brad. She tried to play the charm card, but her mascara was running and her desperation was showing. "Look, there has been a terrible mistake," she said, forcing a wobbly smile. "My father is Harrison Prescott. He must have forgotten to tell the security company about us. We just need to get inside and straighten this out." A black sedan rolled up the driveway from the inside of the estate. It stopped just behind the gate. The rear door opened and Sullivan stepped out. He looked immaculate in his suit, holding a file folder. He walked to the bars of the gate and looked at them through the iron. "Hello, Natalie." "Hello, Brad." Brad said, relief washing over his face. "Thank God. Tell these gorillas to let us in. Dad has gone crazy." He cut off the cards. He locked the accounts. "We need to get inside and find his medical records. We need to get him help." Sullivan shook his head slowly. "There is no mistake, Brad. And Harrison is perfectly sane. In fact, he is more lucid than he has been in a long time." He held up a document, pressing it against the bars so they could read it. "This is a court order," Sullivan explained. "As of 9 o'clock this morning, the title to this property was transferred to the Phoenix Trust. Harrison Prescott no longer owns this house personally. The trust does, and the trust has strict occupancy rules." "What are you talking about?" Natalie shrieked, gripping the iron bars. "What trust? This is my house. I grew up here. Well, I lived here for 3 years. It is the same thing." "It is not your house," Natalie Sullivan said, his voice cutting like a knife. "It never was. Your name is not on the deed. Your name is not on the mortgage. You were a guest, and as of this morning, your guest privileges have been permanently revoked. You are trespassing." "This is illegal," Brad shouted. "You cannot just kick us out. We have tenants' rights. We need 30 days' notice." Sullivan smiled a cold, shark-like smile. "Actually, Brad, since you never paid rent, and there is no lease agreement, you are considered guests at will. However, Mr. Prescott is a fair man. He has authorized me to grant you a one-time access window." Sullivan signaled to the guard, who unlocked the padlock. The chain rattled as it fell to the ground. The gate groaned open just wide enough for a person to walk through. "You have 30 minutes, Sullivan said, checking his watch. "You may enter the premises to retrieve essential personal items. Clothing, toiletries, medication." 30 minutes. Natalie gasped. "That is impossible. We have furniture. We have art. We have our lives in there." "You have 30 minutes, Sullivan repeated, "and you will be escorted by security. Anything that was purchased by Harrison Prescott stays. Anything that is titled to Harrison Prescott stays. If you try to remove property belonging to the Phoenix Trust, you will be arrested for theft. The clock starts now." Brad and Natalie looked at each other, then bolted through the gate. They ran toward the front door like contestants on a twisted game show. The 3 guards followed them closely. I switched the camera feed to the interior cameras. I watched them burst into the foyer. They did not know where to start. Brad ran for the study. I knew exactly what he was going for. The wall safe. He scrambled to the painting that hid the safe and ripped it off the wall, throwing it on the floor. He punched in the code. Nothing happened. I had changed the combination remotely 2 hours ago. Damn it, Brad screamed, kicking the wall. He turned and saw the display case on the desk. My watch collection. The vintage Patek Philippe, the Audemars Piguet, and the Rolex Daytona I had bought for him. He grabbed the case. Put it down, the guard said, stepping into the room. These are mine, Brad lied, clutching the box to his chest. They were gifts. Do you have a receipt? The guard asked. Do you have a deed of gift? No, who keeps receipts for gifts? Brad sputtered. It is my collection. The inventory list says otherwise, the guard said, referring to a tablet in his hand. These items are listed as assets of the Prescott estate, now property of the Phoenix Trust. Put them down, or I will put you down. Brad hesitated. He looked at the guard's size. He looked at the gun on the guard's hip. He set the box back on the desk, his hands shaking with impotent rage. Upstairs, Natalie was in her dressing room. She was pulling designer dresses off the hangers, stuffing them into black trash bags. She grabbed a Louis Vuitton suitcase and started throwing shoes into it. She reached for her jewelry box. She opened it and grabbed a diamond tennis bracelet. Hold on, Sullivan said, appearing in the doorway. Natalie froze. This is mine, she hissed, clutching the bracelet. He gave this to me for my 30th birthday. Sullivan consulted his list. Item 472, diamond tennis bracelet, purchased by Harrison Prescott, insured under Harrison Prescott's policy. It stays. You are evil, Natalie screamed, throwing the bracelet at him. It bounced off his chest and landed on the carpet. You are sick. How can you do this to us? I am not doing anything, Natalie, Sullivan said calmly, picking up the bracelet. You did this. You chose a party over a life. This is just the bill coming due. He pointed to her ears. Those earrings, he said. 3-carat diamond studs. Harrison bought those for Christmas 2 years ago. Take them off. Natalie's hands flew to her ears. No, you cannot be serious. I am wearing them. Take them off, Sullivan repeated, his voice hard. Or we call the police and report a theft in progress. Do you want to leave here in handcuffs or in a cab? Natalie began to cry. Not the soft, manipulative tears she used to get her way. These were ugly, guttural sobs of humiliation. She unclasped the earrings, her fingers fumbling. She dropped them into Sullivan's outstretched hand. You have 5 minutes left, the guard announced from the hallway. They scrambled. They grabbed underwear. They grabbed toothbrushes. They grabbed whatever they could carry in their arms. They looked like looters in their own home. When the time was up, the guards escorted them out. They stood on the driveway, surrounded by trash bags stuffed with clothes. They looked like refugees from a life they had never earned. The gate began to close. Wait, Brad shouted, running back toward the house. My car keys, the Porsche keys, they are on the hook. The Porsche belongs to the trust, Sullivan called out, as the gate clanged shut. And your SUV is leased in the company name. The repo truck is waiting for it at the bottom of the hill. I suggest you call an Uber. The chain was wrapped back around the bars. The padlock clicked shut. I watched them on the monitor. Brad kicked a trash bag, sending his clothes spilling onto the dusty driveway. Natalie sat down on her suitcase and buried her face in her hands. They were alone. They were homeless. And for the first time in their lives, they were completely broke. I took a sip of my water. It was cool and refreshing. Sullivan looked up at the security camera. He knew I was watching. He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. Phase 1 was complete. The castle had been retaken. The parasites had been purged. But the war wasn't over. They were down, but they weren't out. Desperate people do desperate things. And I knew my family. They wouldn't accept defeat this easily. They would try to fight back. They would try to play the victim card. Let them try, I thought. I have an ace up my sleeve. They cannot even imagine. I turned off the monitor. The sun was setting over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of blood and gold. It was going to be a beautiful night. For me, at least. For Beatrice, Brad, and Natalie, it was going to be a very long, very cold, dark night of the soul. While I sat in the comfort of my home enjoying the silence that had finally returned to my life, my private investigator was busy documenting the reality that had befallen my ungrateful family. He sent me a detailed report along with audio recordings from that night, and piecing it together painted a picture of absolute misery that I would be lying if I said I did not enjoy. They had tried to check into the Ritz expecting to charge it to my corporate account, as they always did. But the humiliation they faced at the front desk must have been legendary. When the manager informed them that all cards connected to my name had been reported lost or stolen, and that their personal cards were declined due to lack of funds, they caused a scene that nearly got them arrested. Forced to retreat with their tails between their legs, they didn't end up in a luxury suite with room service and Egyptian cotton sheets. Instead, they found themselves on the outskirts of town, pulling into the parking lot of the Starlight Motel, a place where the neon sign buzzed ominously, and the letter L was missing, making it read, the Starlight Motel. It was the kind of place where people went when they did not want to be found, or when they had nowhere else to go. The exterior was peeling paint, and the air smelled of stale cigarettes and exhaust fumes from the nearby highway. I can only imagine the look on Beatrice's face as she dragged her designer luggage across the cracked asphalt, her high heels catching in the uneven pavement. This was a woman who had not made her own bed in 30 years, and now she was staring down the barrel of a night in a room that likely cost less than the salad she had ordered for lunch that day. They hauled their bags into a cramped room on the ground floor. The carpet was a suspicious shade of brown, worn thin in the traffic areas, and stained in the corners. There was a single flickering bulb in the center of the ceiling that cast long, sickly shadows against the walls. The furniture was bolted to the floor, a precaution against theft that spoke volumes about the usual clientele. Beatrice sat on the edge of the bed, careful not to touch the bedspread with her bare hands, and burst into tears. It wasn't the soft, elegant weeping she used to manipulate me. This was the ugly, heaving sobbing of someone who realizes their reality has shattered. Brad, who had been pacing the small room like a caged tiger, finally snapped. The stress of the day, the humiliation at the bank, and the realization that his free ride was over had stripped away his charming mask. He kicked one of the suitcases, sending it crashing against the wall with a loud thud that made Beatrice scream. He turned on her with a look of pure venom. He pointed a finger in her face, his voice shaking, not with fear, but with a cold, dark rage. He told her to shut up. He said he was sick of hearing her whine. Beatrice looked up at him, shocked, her mascara running down her cheeks in black streaks. She tried to defend herself, stammering that she didn't know this would happen, that she thought I would calm down eventually. That was when Brad revealed his true nature, the predator I had always suspected him to be. He laughed, a cruel, mocking sound that bounced off the thin walls. He called her a useless old woman. He said she was pathetic. He screamed that she had one job, which was to keep me happy and docile, to keep the money flowing, and she had failed spectacularly. He mocked her for her age, telling her that without my money to pay for her treatments and her clothes, she was nothing. He said she didn't know how to handle a man, that she had let me get off the leash because she was too busy spending money instead of securing it. Beatrice sat there, stunned into silence. In all our years of marriage, even when things were bad, I had never spoken to her with such disrespect. I had never attacked her dignity. But here was Brad, the son-in-law she had championed, the man she had defended against me time and time again, tearing her apart because she was no longer useful to him. Natalie, my daughter, was sitting in the corner on a wobbly chair, frantically tapping at her phone, trying to find a signal that didn't exist in that concrete block of a room. She didn't defend her mother. She didn't yell at Brad for his cruelty. Instead, she threw her phone onto the bed in frustration and joined the chorus of blame. She said this was all my fault. She called me a monster. She said I was cruel and vindictive, and that I was doing this just to hurt them because I was a bitter old man who couldn't stand to see them happy. She completely ignored the fact that they had spent years lying to me, stealing from me, and treating me like a walking checkbook. In her mind, she was the victim, the princess who had been unfairly exiled from her castle by the evil king. The room fell into a heavy, resentful silence, broken only by the sound of sirens passing by on the highway and the drip of a leaking faucet in the bathroom. Brad sat down on the other side of the bed, rubbing his temples, his mind clearly racing. I know how his mind works. He is a parasite, and when a parasite loses its host, it doesn't reflect on its actions. It immediately starts looking for a way to latch back on or to find a new weakness to exploit. He stared at the wall for a long time, his eyes narrowing. Then he slowly turned to look at Beatrice and Natalie, a new sinister calmness taking over his features. He asked them to think about the last few months. He reminded them that I had just undergone major heart surgery only a few months ago. He spoke about the heavy anesthesia, the long recovery time, and the cocktail of medications I was taking. Natalie looked at him confused, asking what that had to do with anything. Brad stood up, energized by his new idea. He started pacing again, but this time with purpose. He said that my behavior had been erratic. He claimed that cutting off my own family, selling the assets, and acting with such sudden aggression was not the behavior of a sane man. He spun a narrative right there in that filthy motel room. He said that the surgery must have affected my brain. He suggested that the lack of oxygen during the procedure, or perhaps a reaction to the medication, had caused cognitive decline. He looked at Beatrice and told her that I wasn't just mean, that I was sick. He said I had lost my mental capacity. He planted the seed that I was making irrational decisions that were dangerous to myself and the family estate. Beatrice, desperate for any solution that would get her back into her mansion, wiped her eyes and asked what they could do about it. Brad smiled, and it was the smile of a wolf circling a wounded animal. He said they didn't need to beg me for money. He said they didn't need to apologize. He said they needed to take control legally. He proposed that they sue me. He said they would file an emergency petition with the court, claiming that I had lost my mental capacity. He used the term mental incapacity specifically. He said they would argue that I was no longer fit to manage my own affairs, and that my sudden, erratic financial decisions were proof of my decline. He looked at Natalie and told her that she needed to be strong, that she needed to step up. He said they would petition for a conservatorship. He explained that if the judge agreed, control of my finances, my company, and my entire life would be handed over to a legal guardian. And who better to be that guardian than his loving wife and daughter? They sat there in that dim light, absorbing the plan. I could see the hope returning to their eyes, a dark, twisted hope. They weren't thinking about my health. They weren't worried about my well-being. They were salivating at the idea of gaining total control over my assets without having to ask for permission. They were imagining signing checks, selling properties, and accessing accounts with the stroke of a pen, all under the guise of protecting me. Natalie nodded slowly, agreeing that I hadn't been myself lately. She convinced herself that I must be sick because that was easier than admitting she was a disappointment. Beatrice, ever the survivor, latched onto the idea as her lifeline. She agreed that I needed help, that I needed to be managed for my own good. Brad told them they would find a lawyer the next morning, one who specialized in elder law and contested conservatorships. He said they would use the medical records from my surgery as the foundation of their case. He told them to get some sleep because they had a war to fight in the morning. As I listened to the recording of their plot sitting in my study, with a glass of scotch in my hand, I didn't feel fear. I felt a cold resolve. They thought I was a clueless old man who had lost his mind. They thought they could use the legal system to strip me of my dignity and my freedom just to get their hands on my money. They were about to find out that my mind was sharper than ever. They wanted a legal battle, They wanted to question my capacity. I would give them the battle of their lives, and I would expose every single one of their lies in open court. They thought they had hit rock bottom in that motel room, but they had no idea that I had not even begun to dig the hole they were standing in. The glow of my laptop screen was the only light in the room as I sat in the darkness of my new sanctuary, a sleek, modern apartment high in the mountains of Montana. While they believed I was a senile old man, wandering confused through the corridors of a lonely house, I was actually miles away, watching their every move with the precision of a hawk hunting field mice. I had not just hired a private investigator, I had taken measures into my own hands. Brad, for all his arrogance about being modern and tech-savvy, had never bothered to update the security software on his phone. It took a simple phishing link disguised as a bank notification for me to gain remote access to his device's camera and microphone. He carried his own surveillance bug right in his pocket, and he had no idea that I was the one holding the leash. I watched the live feed as they huddled into a cramped office that smelled of stale coffee and desperation. They had found a lawyer just as Brad had promised, but this was not the high-powered corporate counsel they were used to dealing with. This man was a bottom feeder, the kind of attorney who chased ambulances and advertised on the back of bus benches. His suit was ill-fitting, and his eyes darted around the room with a nervous energy that told me he knew exactly how unethical this meeting was. Brad was doing most of the talking, his voice smooth and practiced, as he laid out the narrative he had concocted in that motel room. He told the lawyer that I was suffering from severe post-operative cognitive decline. He claimed that the anesthesia from my heart surgery had caused permanent damage to my frontal lobe, leading to impulsive, reckless spending and paranoid delusions. He described my decision to cut them off not as a rational reaction to their theft and betrayal, but as a symptom of a diseased mind. Beatrice sat next to him, nodding in agreement, her face a mask of tragic concern. She played the part of the grieving wife, perfectly, dabbing at dry eyes with a tissue. She told the lawyer that it broke her heart to do this, but she had to protect me from myself. She said I had started forgetting names, getting lost in my own house, and becoming violent when confused. It was a masterpiece of fiction. Every word was a lie, but she delivered it with the conviction of a woman fighting for her survival. The lawyer leaned forward, tapping his pen on a yellow legal pad. He told them that proving mental incapacity was difficult, especially without a recent diagnosis from a neurologist. He said the courts would be skeptical without medical evidence. Brad didn't even flinch. He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that my headphones picked up clearly. He asked if the lawyer knew a doctor who might be sympathetic to their situation. He used the word sympathetic, but we all knew he meant corrupt. He said they needed a professional opinion that matched their observations, and they were willing to pay a premium for a rush evaluation based on existing records rather than an in-person exam. The lawyer smiled, a greasy, unpleasant expression that made my skin crawl. He said he knew a psychiatrist who owed him a favor, someone who specialized in reviewing files and creating retrospective profiles. He told them that for a fee he could get them the medical affidavit they needed to file for an emergency temporary conservatorship. He explained that once the emergency motion was filed, the court would freeze my assets immediately pending a hearing. I sat back in my chair, my heart rate steady, my breathing calm. I could have stopped them right then. I could have sent a message to Brad's phone. I could have called the police to report the conspiracy. I could have had my own lawyers intervene before the paperwork was even drafted. But I didn't do any of that. I watched them shake hands with the devil. I listened as they agreed to pay this man with money they didn't have, promising him a percentage of the estate once they gained control. I wanted them to do it. I wanted them to file that motion. If I stopped them now, it would just be a family dispute, a private, ugly matter that would fade away. But if they filed those papers with the court, if they submitted a forged medical report, and swore under oath that I was mentally incompetent, they would be crossing a line from which there was no return. They would be committing fraud, perjury, and conspiracy. They were building a trap for me, but they were too blind to see that they were the ones standing on the trapdoor. I turned off the feed and walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows. The view was breathtaking, snow-capped peaks stretching out as far as the eye could see, the air crisp and clean. I was thousands of miles away from their toxicity, and I had never felt healthier. I checked my watch. It was time for my medication. I walked to the kitchen island where my pills were organized in a daily dispenser, not because I was forgetful, but because I was disciplined. I took my heart medication with a glass of water, my hand steady. Then I went to the home gym I had installed in the second bedroom. I spent the next hour on the treadmill running at a steady incline, watching my heart rate monitor. The numbers were perfect. My recovery had been grueling, but I had adhered to every single instruction my doctors gave me. I ate clean, I exercised daily, and my mind was sharper than it had been in 20 years. The surgery hadn't weakened my brain. It had given me a second chance at life, and I wasn't going to waste it being a victim. I lifted weights, feeling the burn in my muscles, focusing on the strength returning to my body. They were banking on a frail, confused old man showing up to court. They expected me to be disheveled, to stutter, to crumble under the pressure of their accusations. They were expecting the man they had beaten down over years of manipulation. They had no idea who they were about to face. When I finished my workout, I showered and dressed in comfortable clothes, feeling energized. I checked my email and saw the notification from my legal team. The court docket had been updated. The petition for emergency conservatorship had been filed. They had actually done it. They had officially accused me of being mentally unfit and requested legal control over my entire life. I walked back to the window and looked out at the vast, rugged landscape. A cold smile touched my lips. They wanted to play a game of mental chess, but they had forgotten that I was the one who taught them the rules. They thought they could use the law to shackle me, but they had just handed me the weapon I needed to destroy them completely. I wasn't angry anymore. I was focused. I was ready. Let them tell the world I was crazy. Let them drag my name through the mud. Because when I walked into that courtroom, when I stood before the judge with the evidence I had gathered, with the medical records that proved my sanity and the recordings that proved their treachery, the shockwave would be strong enough to shatter their lives forever. I picked up my phone and dialed my lawyer. When he answered, I didn't ask for advice. I didn't ask for a settlement. I gave him a simple instruction. I told him to accept service of the lawsuit. I told him not to fight the hearing date. I told him we would see them in court, and we would be ready. They wanted a show. I would give them a spectacle. They wanted to prove I was incompetent. I would prove they were criminals. The trap was set, the bait was taken, and now all I had to do was wait for the steel jaws to snap shut. I whispered to the empty room, my voice echoing with the promise of the storm to come. You want to play crazy? Fine. Let's see who breaks first. The Superior Court was a cavernous room paneled in dark, intimidating wood that seemed to absorb the light rather than reflect it. The air was stale, recycled through vents that hummed with a low, monotonous drone. It was a place designed to make people feel small, to remind them of the weight of the law. I sat in the back row, tucked away in the shadows of the public gallery, wearing a nondescript coat and a hat pulled low. They had not seen me yet. They were too busy arranging themselves at the plaintiff's table like actors taking their places on a stage. I watched as Brad and Natalie took their seats. They had shed the frantic desperation of the motel room. Today, they were the picture of sorrowful dignity. Brad wore a suit that was sober and serious, his tie perfectly knotted, his hair groomed to project responsibility. He looked like the dutiful son-in-law, the man who was reluctantly stepping up to shoulder a heavy burden. Natalie was dressed in modest black, a color she usually reserved for cocktail parties, but today it was meant to evoke mourning. She sat with her head bowed, her hand clasped tightly in her lap, her shoulders shaking with what looked like suppressed sobs. It was a performance that would have garnered applause on Broadway. Their lawyer, the man with the shifting eyes and the cheap suit, stood before the bench. He had smoothed his hair and polished his shoes, but he still carried the scent of desperation. He began his opening statement with a voice that oozed false compassion. He told the judge that this was not a case about money or control, but a tragedy of the human mind. He painted a picture of a man who was once a titan of industry, a pillar of the community, who had been reduced to a paranoid shadow of his former self. He held up a stack of documents, waving them in the air like a flag. He claimed they were financial records that proved I was dissipating the family estate with reckless abandon. He spoke of the sale of the mansion not as a rational business decision to liquidate an asset, but as a frantic impulse of a diseased brain. He described the freezing of the credit cards not as a protective measure against theft, but as a sign of paranoid delusion. He told the court that I believed my own family was stealing from me, a claim he dismissed with a scoff, as if the very idea were ludicrous. Then he presented the medical evidence. He handed the judge the file they had purchased from the corrupt psychiatrist. He spoke of post-operative cognitive decline, of the damaging effects of anesthesia on the elderly brain. He used medical terminology he barely understood, weaving a narrative that I had suffered a break from reality. He claimed I was wandering the country, aimlessly vulnerable and confused, a danger to myself and my fortune. Natalie took the stand first. She walked slowly, wiping her eyes with a tissue. When she spoke, her voice was a fragile whisper. She told the judge that it broke her heart to be there. She said that her father had always been her hero, her rock. She described imaginary phone calls where I supposedly ranted about government conspiracies and enemies in the walls. She said I had forgotten her birthday. She said I had looked at her with eyes that did not recognize her. She looked at the judge with tears streaming down her face and said she was terrified that I would end up dead in a ditch somewhere if the court did not grant them the power to bring me home. Brad followed her. His testimony was different, calculated to appeal to the judge's sense of logic. He spoke of the business. He claimed that my erratic behavior was destroying the company I had built. He lied about clients pulling out, about deals falling through because of my interference. He positioned himself as the only thing standing between the family legacy and total ruin. He said he had tried to reason with me, tried to help me manage the accounts, but that I had become violent. He invented a scene where I threw a vase at him, screaming obscenities. He shook his head sadly, saying he bore no ill will, he only wanted to stabilize the situation for the good of everyone. But the climax of their theater, the moment designed to seal my fate, belonged to Beatrice. My wife walked to the stand looking smaller and frailer than I had ever seen her. She was not wearing her usual diamonds. She wore a simple gray dress and no makeup, exposing the lines on her face to garner sympathy. She sat down and looked at the judge with an expression of utter defeat. She did not speak of the business or the bank accounts. She spoke of us. She told a story of a marriage that had been a partnership of love and respect until the surgery changed everything. She said the man she had shared her bed with for 30 years had vanished, replaced by a stranger who was cold and cruel. She claimed that my decision to leave was not a choice but an episode of dementia. She said I had simply walked out one day, confused and disoriented, leaving her alone and terrified. She leaned forward, clutching the railing of the witness stand, her knuckles white. She looked the judge in the eye and delivered the line that made my blood run cold with its audacity. She said, "Your Honor, I do not care about the money. I do not care about the house. I just want my husband back. I want him home so I can take care of him. He is sick. He does not know what he is doing. He is alone out there, and he is scared. Please let me bring him home. Let me be his guardian." The courtroom was silent. I could feel the shift in the air. The judge, an older man with silver hair and a face etched with lines of compassion, was leaning forward. He looked from Beatrice's tear-stained face to the documents on his desk. He looked at Brad's stoic concern and Natalie's trembling form. He was buying it. He saw a loving family desperate to save their patriarch from the ravages of age and illness. He saw a tragedy, not a heist. I saw him pick up his pen ready to sign the order. He cleared his throat and began to speak, his voice heavy with sympathy. He said that in cases like these, the court must always act in the best interest of the vulnerable party. He said the evidence presented painted a clear and disturbing picture of a man in rapid decline. He said he was inclined to grant the emergency conservatorship to ensure my safety and the preservation of the estate. Beatrice let out a soft sob of relief. Brad placed a comforting hand on her shoulder, but I could see the triumph in his eyes. He thought he had won. He thought the gavel was about to come down and hand him the keys to the kingdom. He thought I was miles away, lost and defenseless. I stood up. The movement was sharp and sudden, breaking the stillness of the room. The wooden bench creaked as I stepped out into the aisle. I took off my hat. I unbuttoned my coat, revealing a perfectly tailored suit. I walked down the center of the courtroom, my steps echoing on the hard floor. I did not look like a frail old man. I did not look confused. I looked like a man who had come to collect a debt. I spoke clearly, my voice projecting to every corner of the room, cutting through their lies like a knife. I said, "Your Honor, before you sign that paper, I believe there is some additional evidence you need to see." The heads of my family snapped toward me in unison. The color drained from their faces instantly. Beatrice gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Natalie froze, her fake tears drying instantly. And Brad looked as if he had seen a ghost. The trap had been sprung, and the look of absolute horror in their eyes was worth every penny I had spent to get here. The silence that followed my interruption was heavy enough to crush a lesser man, but I stood in it comfortably, letting the shockwave of my presence wash over the room. I walked toward the bench with a stride that was steady and purposeful, my back straight, my eyes clear and focused. The cane they claimed I needed was nowhere to be seen. The confusion they claimed clouded my mind was visibly absent. I was impeccable in a charcoal suit that cost more than their lawyer made in a month, and I radiated the kind of authority that cannot be faked. The judge stared at me, his mouth slightly ajar, his eyes darting between the frail description in the medical file and the vibrant man standing before him. I stopped at the defense table and placed a heavy briefcase on the wood with a solid thud. My lawyer, who had been sitting quietly until this moment, stood up and bowed his head slightly to me, deferring to my lead. I turned to look at my family. The color had drained from their faces, leaving them as pale as wax figures. Beatrice was trembling, her hands clutching her purse so tightly her knuckles were blue. Natalie looked as if she were trying to wake up from a nightmare, her mouth opening and closing without sound. And Brad, the architect of this farce, looked like a man who had just heard the click of a loaded gun behind his head. I addressed the court, my voice calm and resonant, filling the cavernous space. "I apologized for the dramatic entrance, Your Honor, but I felt it was necessary to demonstrate the gross inaccuracy of the plaintiff's claims. They have described a man who is lost, broken, and senile. I stand before you today to show you that the only thing broken here is their moral compass." I signaled to my lawyer, who handed a flash drive to the bailiff. I asked the court for permission to play a video file. I explained that while my family claimed to be mourning my decline, they seemed to have a very different attitude when they thought I wasn't watching. The judge, still reeling from the visual contradiction of my presence, nodded his assent. The large screen on the wall flickered to life. It was the footage from the live stream the night of my birthday. The audio boomed through the courtroom speakers, clear and undeniable. There was Natalie holding a glass of champagne, laughing with her friends. Her voice echoed off the walls, sharp and cruel. She called me an old fossil. She mocked my surgery. She complained that I was taking too long to die, and that she deserved her inheritance now, while she was still young enough to enjoy it. The courtroom erupted in a collective gasp. I saw the judge recoil, his face twisting in disgust. Natalie shrank in her seat, covering her face with her hands, trying to hide from her own image. But the video wasn't done. The camera panned to Brad. He was holding a bottle of scotch, my scotch, and raising a toast. His words filled the room, chilling in their callousness. He toasted to the old man finally kicking the bucket. He laughed about how easy it would be to spend my money once I was gone. He called Beatrice a useful idiot. Beatrice let out a strangled cry, looking at Brad with betrayal written all over her face. But Brad couldn't look at her. He was staring at the screen, mesmerized by his own destruction. I signaled for the video to stop. The silence that returned was different now. It wasn't respectful. It was charged with fury. I turned back to the judge. I told him that this was the loving family that wanted to protect me. I told him that their petition was not born of concern, but of greed and malice. But that video was just the opening act. I told the court that I had one more witness to call. I gestured to the back of the room, and Sullivan walked in. He didn't look like a lawyer or a doctor. He looked like exactly what he was, a man who dug up secrets for a living. He carried a stack of financial documents that were thick and damning. He took the stand, and under my lawyer's questioning, he laid out the financial reality of my so-called mismanagement. He showed the court that every asset I had sold was my own property, acquired before my marriage to Beatrice, or protected by trusts they had no access to. He proved that my financial decisions were sound and profitable. But then came the blow that would shatter them completely. Sullivan produced a series of checks drawn from my private retirement fund. He projected the images of the checks onto the screen. They were signed with my name, but the signature was shaky, a poor forgery that looked nothing like my own bold hand. The judge leaned in, squinting at the screen. Sullivan explained that these checks totaling $500,000 had been cashed over the last 6 months while I was recovering from surgery. Brad stood up, shouting that this was a lie, that he had used that money for business expenses, for the family maintenance. Sullivan didn't even look at him. He simply clicked a button, and the next slide appeared. It was a bank trace, a clear line connecting the stolen money to its final destination. The account did not belong to a business. It did not belong to Beatrice or Natalie. The name on the account was Tiffany Crystal. The courtroom murmured in confusion. Who was Tiffany Crystal? Sullivan answered the question with the precision of an executioner. He described her as a 22-year-old model living in a penthouse apartment in the city, an apartment paid for by the stolen funds. He showed photos of her social media, where she thanked her daddy for the new car, the designer bags, and the lavish vacations. And then he showed a photo of her with her benefactor. It was Brad. They were on a yacht, arms wrapped around each other, Brad kissing her cheek, while she held up a glass of champagne paid for with my retirement money. The sound that came out of Natalie was not human. It was a primal shriek of rage and humiliation that tore through the decorum of the court. She stood up, her chair clattering to the floor behind her. She didn't look at me. She didn't look at the judge. She looked at Brad, who was now cowering in his seat, his face the color of ash. She screamed his name, a sound full of venom and pain. She lunged at him across the small space separating them. Her manicured nails became claws. She raked them across his face, drawing blood. She hit him, screaming that he was a thief, a liar, and a cheater. She screamed that she had betrayed her own father for him, and he had spent the money on a child. Pandemonium broke loose. The bailiffs rushed forward, struggling to pull Natalie off her husband. Brad was trying to shield his face, sobbing and begging for help. Beatrice had fainted, slumping sideways in her chair, totally forgotten in the chaos. I stood in the center of the storm, untouched and calm. I watched my daughter destroy the man she had conspired with. I watched the family that had tried to bury me tear itself apart from the inside out. The judge was banging his gavel, shouting for order, but the damage was done. The truth was out, naked and ugly and undeniable. As the bailiffs finally dragged a screaming Natalie away and handcuffed a bleeding Brad, I looked up at the judge. He looked back at me, and in his eyes I saw not just agreement, but a profound apology. I buttoned my jacket, smoothed my tie, and prepared to walk out of that courtroom, not as a ward of the state, but as a free man who had just won the war without firing a single shot. The gavel did not just strike the wood, it struck the final nail into the coffin of the life they had tried to steal from me. The judge looked down at the defendant's table with eyes that held no mercy. Only the cold, hard glare of justice served. He declared the petition for conservatorship dismissed with prejudice, meaning they could never file it again. But he was not finished. He leaned over the bench and looked directly at Brad, who was wiping blood from his face with a trembling hand. The judge stated that based on the evidence presented regarding the forged signatures and the misappropriation of funds, he was referring the matter to the district attorney and the Federal Bureau of Investigation immediately. Brad tried to stand up, perhaps to run, or perhaps to beg, but the double doors at the back of the courtroom swung open. 2 men in dark suits walked in. They did not need to introduce themselves. The badge on the belt of the lead agent caught the light. They walked straight to the table. The sound of handcuffs ratcheting tight around Brad's wrists was the sweetest music I had ever heard. He was crying now, sobbing about how it was a mistake, about how he could explain, but nobody was listening. He was dragged out the side door, his future now consisting of steel bars and prison food. Natalie watched him go with a look of pure hatred, but her victory over him was short-lived. The divorce proceedings began the very next day. She thought she would get half of his assets, but Sullivan had done his work well. Brad had no assets. He had debt. He had leveraged everything he owned to pay for his lifestyle and his mistress. Natalie was left with nothing but her name, and even that was tarnished beyond repair. The last report I received from Sullivan included a photograph that I keep not out of malice, but as a reminder of the consequences of greed. It shows Natalie wearing a polyester vest standing behind a cash register at a discount supermarket. She is scanning a can of beans, her face devoid of the arrogance that once defined her. She looks tired. She looks old. She looks like someone who finally understands the value of $1 because she has to earn it on her feet all day long. And then there was Beatrice, my wife. The woman who promised to love me in sickness and in health, but tried to have me declared insane when I became an inconvenience. She waited for me outside the courthouse that day, tears streaming down her face, expecting that I would take her back. She thought that with Brad gone and the truth out, I would need her. She reached for my hand, but I stepped back. I told her that the husband she knew was gone. I told her that she had killed him with her betrayal. I cut her off completely. No alimony, no settlements. The prenuptial agreement she had signed decades ago protected everything I had made before our marriage, and the forensic accounting proved she had been complicit in the theft of marital assets, which voided the rest. She was evicted from the mansion 3 days later. She lives in a small, subsidized apartment, now living on a social security check that barely covers the rent. She has no drivers, no country clubs, and no friends, because people like Beatrice only have friends when they have money. I did not go back to the empty house. It felt like a mausoleum, a monument to a dead life. I instructed my lawyers to sell everything. The mansion, the cars, the furniture, the art. I wanted none of it. It was all tainted. The proceeds from the sale were astronomical. I took half of that fortune, a sum that could build a small city, and I signed it over to the Heart Institute that had performed my surgery. I wanted the money to save hearts, because God knows my own family had none. The rest of the money was my ticket to freedom. I packed one bag, I took my passport, and I walked away from the wreckage without looking back. The sun here in Tuscany is different. It feels warmer, richer somehow. It smells of baked earth and rosemary. I live in a small stone farmhouse on the edge of a vineyard. It is simple. It is quiet. And it is real. I do not wear suits anymore. I wear linen shirts with the sleeves rolled up and trousers stained with garden soil. My hands are rough again, not from stress, but from work. I am sitting on a low stone wall in the late afternoon light. Next to me is a bicycle overturned, its wheels spinning lazily in the breeze. A little boy named Matteo, who lives on the next farm over, is watching me with wide, dark eyes. He speaks no English, and my Italian is broken and clumsy, but we understand each other perfectly. The chain had come off his bike, and he brought it to me. Because he knows the old American man can fix things. I grab the wrench and tighten the bolt, my fingers nimble and strong. I grease the chain, wiping the excess oil on a rag. I spin the pedal, and the wheel turns smoothly, a silent, perfect rotation. I look at Matteo and nod. He grins a smile that is missing a front tooth and jumps up, clapping his hands. He says, "Grazie, signore," over and over again. I ruffle his hair. I feel a laugh bubbling up in my chest, a sound I have not made in years. It is a real laugh. It is not performed. It is not cynical. It is just joy. I hand him the bike and he rides off down the dusty path, shouting his happiness to the olive trees. I watch him go, feeling a sense of peace settling over me like a warm blanket. I turn back to the small table set up under the trellis. There is a bottle of local red wine, a loaf of crusty bread, and a plate of cheese. It is a feast fit for a king. Suddenly, a noise breaks the silence. It is a buzzing sound, an electronic intrusion that does not belong in this paradise. I look at the phone sitting on the table. It is vibrating, dancing across the wood. The screen lights up. The name displayed is Beatrice. She is calling. Maybe she wants money. Maybe she wants to apologize. Maybe she just wants to know that I am still alive so she can feel less guilty. I look at the name and I feel nothing. No anger, no sadness, no regret. Just a mild annoyance that my sunset is being interrupted. I pick up the phone. I do not slide the button to answer. I do not decline the call. I look at the glass of wine in my hand, the liquid dark and rich as blood. With a calm, steady movement, I drop the phone into the glass. It lands with a splash, sinking to the bottom. Bubbles rise to the surface as the wine floods the circuitry. The screen flickers once bright and desperate, and then goes black. The buzzing stops. I lift the glass and look at the drowned device. It is just a piece of plastic and metal now. It has no power over me. I pour the wine and the phone onto the ground, watching the red liquid stain the dry earth. I pour myself a fresh glass from the bottle. I take a sip, tasting the grapes, tasting the earth, tasting the freedom. I look out at the rolling hills turning gold in the twilight. I have learned the hardest lesson a man can learn, but I have learned it well. Family is not the blood that runs in your veins. Family is not a name on a piece of paper. Family is the people who treat you with respect. Family is the people who care if you live or die, not for what you can give them, but for who you are. I take another sip of wine and smile at the horizon. I am alone here, but for the first time in my life, I am not lonely. I am Harrison, and I am finally free. Harrison's journey is a powerful reminder that family is defined not by bloodline, but by behavior. A parent's love is unconditional, yet it should never be a weapon for children to exploit. When generosity is met with betrayal, walking away isn't cruelty. It is the ultimate act of self-respect. True wealth isn't found in mansions or bank accounts, but in the peace of being valued for who you are, not what you own. No matter your age, it is never too late to reclaim your dignity, rewrite your ending, and find the freedom you truly deserve. What are your thoughts on Harrison's final decision? Was his departure too harsh? Or was it the necessary price for their greed? Please leave your opinion in the comments below. Don't forget to hit subscribe so you won't miss the next emotional life story. Your support means the world to me.